Murri, it is so nice to have you on MyFlora Fridays.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you for inviting me.
yeah, no problem. We've been following each other for a while. I'm super interested in what you do. Super smart lady. I just love it when your comments on LinkedIn are always so, just insightful and informative and educational. And I know you've been on a lot of podcasts, so, whatever, but I'm excited to have you on my podcast.
I'm excited to talk to someone who's more interested in the plants too, because I have done a lot of podcasts, but I often am talking to other people who are more on the lab and extraction side. And so we're very in our own bubble. And the plants are the most important part. So I always appreciate the time I get to talk to growers because I think a lot of our problems in this industry come from a disconnect between the cultivation and everyone else.
Yes. And I talk a lot about this. Like when we talk about the cannabis industry, there are so many arms in the cannabis industry, right? From the plant to the
Right.
medicine, like the people who study the plant, the people who study the people and the effects of the plant on the people. And then we've got the chemists, the extractors, the cultivators, the
Hmm.
breeders. I'm a population geneticist, so I'm not even a grower or a breeder, although people hear geneticist and they're like, "Oh, you grow." And I'm like, "No."
Yeah. So what
Oh.
seeds do you sell?
What strains have you bred? I don't do that. So, a population geneticist, for those folks in the audience who don't know what it is I study relationships within and among groups of related individuals. So whether that be, a single population of individuals or two populations of individuals or two different subspecies or within a species. So cannabis is
Mhm.
really like one of, like a dream, right? Because within cannabis, we've got hemp and we've got marijuana. So those are two groups, usage groups, right? Then we've got
Mhm.
sativa in hybrid indica, if you want to consider those groups or not. We've got, pockets all over the world that have regional differences. We've got all the different strains, and those are all different. How different are they? Well, it depends. We've got land races,
Yeah.
and so really, like, I love studying cannabis because of all of the history of it, and we've moved it
Right.
around the globe. But also it's like a super interesting plant.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and it sounds like you're describing like the sociology of a plant almost, where like you get to pick which are the boundaries that you want to create for a group and then study and compare. And, for a lot of plants, we've just had these categories for so long that we accept it and move on. But for cannabis, we're creating these new categories
mm-hmm.
every other day, like even high THC, low THC types of subcategories that are entirely, you know, the result of just how humans want to classify things. Like a lot of times we think of classification as very hard science, but classification is humans naming things, which is quite flexible.
Well, you ask any biologist, what is a species? Like, you're like, yeah, that's a totally easy question to answer. But once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of actually making a
Hmm.
hard line between this species and that species, like,
Right.
it becomes incredibly fuzzy. And so then you're like, you make up rules. It's like, okay, well, it's how about this? Okay, and then you add in this, like, oh,
Right.
it's two individuals that are reproductively viable. All right, well, what about bacteria that doesn't need a or dandelions. They
What
don't need to
about bacteria? Yeah, exactly.
cannabis doesn't need to outcross. It doesn't need to like it can self. So the lines become really fuzzy but
Hmm.
categorization is a necessary tool for
Oh, we love
communication.
it.
For
Humans
community.
want to classify things so badly. Like our whole thought process, even in the way we civilize ourselves into social groups is like we just really want to understand and order things, and group them up. It's kind of the foundation of the way we interact with the world, whereas so many other creatures have to interact with the world in a survival way. We get to be such observers in our hierarchy on the planet.
And we love to name things, right?
Oh, the
Love
best,
to
the
name things.
best. Yep, that's
Which
what you get when you got speech. So many names.
so categorization, classification, naming things. One of the things that I mean, there's always all these different conversations in cannabis, and one of the things we hear a lot is the names don't mean anything. And I'm like, of course they do, right? Do your kids'
They
names?
just mean different things to
They
everybody.
right.
Yeah,
You name your kid. Does it mean anything? Not to me. Like, I don't know how
right.
you named your child. Like my child. I named him, I wanted a unique name, but not like a weird name. So I picked a name that's really common in Australia because I am Australian. But it was when he was born, it wasn't a common name here. Gavin, right?
Hmm.
His middle name is his dad's middle name, his grandfather's name, his godfather's name. And so that's why
Right.
he has
There's
his
a
middle
lot of
name.
meaning in that. Yeah.
Right. And then his last name is his father's last name because his father is the last male in his family. And so I wanted, there to have the potential of, that line going on. So those names do mean something. And they give you, like, if I say Gavin Johns, people will know who I'm talking about. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's Anna's son.
What people want though is like what we're talking about is how names give something context and give it a story. And because the things we're talking about are, wrapped up in this really tricky scientific setting, people want that name to, explain an equation. And so the fact that his name is Gavin does mean something, but it doesn't mean that he's definitely going to have a certain set of genes. It doesn't mean he's definitely going to have certain, risk factors. It doesn't mean he's definitely going to be super good at math, like it's not predictive. And it's
Right.
certainly not predictive on who's going to want to hang out with him, who's going to like him or not like him, who he's going to be annoying to or not, And so in cannabis, when people think about the names, they they want them to mean something about how they are going to feel. They want to personalize
They
the
have an
importance of that
expectation.
name.
They have an expectation.
Exactly.
And then
And
I
that
think
part is messy. I think you're always going to be let down by that because no one agreed that we were going to name things in a way that's supposed to describe how it smells, tastes, or is going to make you feel. And that's really what everyone wants those names to mean because blueberry weed used to smell like blueberry muffins. And, we used to have names that were more obvious. And I think that's what people are nostalgic for when really, you talk to some breeders and the names they'll give you is a contraption of abbreviations and numbers that is unintelligible. And
right.
so, when they
And
start
you
doing
can't
back cross F2, whatever, it
well, and you
gets,
can't commit the like if you have letters and numbers, it doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't you're not
but
going to
those mean a
remember that.
lot to
But they're
those people,
but a
they're giving you an equation.
right,
It's
but a
such a
consumer is not going to be like,
contrast.
"Oh, I like ABC 1 2 3" because they're not going to remember that that name because it's not a name. They're you can't make a connection. Whereas if
Right.
you have blueberry muffin, you're like, oh, tastes like blueberries, and it's like you can picture it,
Yeah.
you can taste it. And so that's like taste, aroma, and those names have a meaning in terms of like effects or a subjective experience. But then you've got names like Acapulco Gold. Is it golden color? Well, it is if you cure it the way that it's done in Acapulco. Jack Herrera. Like, what does
Yeah.
that mean? Well, it's attached to a person, but gives you no information at all of where it came from or the effects or anything like that,
Right.
right? It's named after somebody. Gorilla glue,
It,
right? Does it taste like a gorilla? It probably sticky, right? But
it
gorilla,
probably smells like glue. It would be the idea. Like if I'm imagining the like rubber cement type of smell, like, people love a name that describes the smell. And I would argue that's a name that doesn't mean anything. I don't need you to tell me this smells like blueberry muffins. I can smell. I know.
I
That's a
always thought
name
it
that's useless.
I always thought it was Gorilla Glue because it's strong and sticky.
I mean, that works too.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'll tell you what, that still is only going to be true of the plants grown by the person who came up with that strain. And as soon as it leaves their garden, there's another version of these names don't mean anything. And that's like whatever I call it to bring it into metric. Or, you know what I mean? Whatever, when I have, two rooms that gave me two different outcomes. And so they don't look the same because of environmental differences. And so I
Right.
can't call them the same thing on the menu. So now I have two strains that were one. The renaming of things gets completely out of hand. And what's really tricky when you take it the next level to extraction is that then we literally are combining things. And so, do you want to know that this live resin is these three different strains that are combined, or do we call it one new thing? Because I'm not putting all that on the label anywhere. And so
Yeah.
then the names become truly fictional, because now I'm just describing a product I've formulated. And so even though we might list it as a strain name categorically in metric and your point of sale and on the label, it'll say strain name, but we're not talking about a strain name at all. We're talking about a product we formulated that is, you know, whether you want to call it, cultivar or strain or whatever, none of that is applicable to a concentrate that is not a plant. And so, then the names really start to mean nothing. Like
Well,
a strain name on an edible starts to get really out of hand because we still haven't really clarified what it means at the plant level. And so for that to be predictive going forward at all those next steps gets very, very difficult to standardize at minimum, if not even just explain on a case by case basis.
I think we could take a page out of the playbook, and I know everybody hates it from the alcohol industry, right? So wines,
Sure.
right? You've got Chardonnay grapes. If you grow them in
Hmm.
France versus
Right.
Sonoma Valley versus New Jersey vinelands, like you're gonna get different flavors, tastes. The wine's gonna be different. It depends on
Right.
who, not only where you grew it, but who made the wine. Like you can love Chardonnay. You go to the store, there's hundreds of Chardonnays. Some of them are
Yeah.
good, some of them are bad. And what I think is good, you might think is bad, right? So there's all these subjective
Right.
things to it. And so I think that we could use strain names, but say this is blueberry muffin grown here by this cultivator so that you get
Right.
more information, and they do that on wine labels, right? And this is, Chardonnay grown in France by this winery. Here's the person who made the wine. Here's how long it was oaked for, hit the year,
Hmm.
things like that. So I think that in that case, you kind of introduce the idea that the environment plays a part, as well as the grower, how it was cured, what they did to it, all of those things.
Right.
Because I,
Well, and then you
I can
go
grow
from
something.
wine to say, here's what's brandy now, because when we start making a change, here's a new product. And so
Mhm.
there's no reason to try to sell brandy as wine just because of their association. We can just say, no, here we go.
Mhm.
Here's, a transitional product. And they don't
Or
have to try to
like a
compete for the
blended
same
table
space.
wine, like a blended table wine. What the hell is that? Like,
A gross sentence. No one
but
wants to order that.
but if you like it, if that's your jam, or like,
Right.
a blended red, what is it a blend
Yeah.
of? Well, on the label, it should tell you what it's a blend of. It's, 60% that and,
Hmm.
and 40% that. So I think you could do that with, I don't know, can you do that with extractions potentially?
Absolutely, because you are making those decisions. So it's much easier to describe and define and name things in the lab based on what you did because you did all of it. Whereas within the cultivation, the things you did are less descriptive of the outcome in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost one to one. I set it to this temperature, I heat it, I decarbed it. And so now I can describe this as Delta 9 THC because it's decarboxylated whatever I was making before. Like I get, really clean differentiations. Whereas, kind of back to the wine example, there's so much about why a certain type of grape grown in this valley in France versus the coast of California they've accepted that those are going to be different things, even if it's literally the same grapes brought over vine at a time from
Mhm.
France. They're still saying, no, 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 this is not grown in France. And
Right.
I think that's okay. I think that's valid. The issue is just whether we all agree on what those boundaries are. And if we don't all know the rules of the game, then
Well,
it's
I
very
think
hard to play.
consumers inherently understand that. Like most people know that this grape grown in France is going to be different than this grape grown in California. Like, you know that because it's just, you know, the pizza in New Jersey is going to be different than the pizza in Colorado. Is it because of the way
Right.
they made it? Is it a difference in the water? Like, there's this ongoing New York, New Jersey pizza thing, and people are saying it's the water because like the cheese is the same, whatever. But I
Right.
think people know that there are differences in things when they're born under different environments or circumstances.
Well, and for people who can't taste the difference between those two different wines, they also still have the information they need to know, is
Hmm.
this white or red wine? If that, like however
How,
simple
however,
your perspective and experience needs to be, or complex, all that information is available. And when we try to consolidate all that information into just a brand, then that doesn't really, then it doesn't mean anything. Then that name is too big of an umbrella to actually describe anything. Then you're just saying this is marijuana, and you know what I mean, and it's not descriptive enough
this
for
is
people.
indica and sativa, like they're bucket categories. Like, do you like
Right.
red? Do you like white? Like, I don't care as long as it's a red one.
Yeah.
It's like I like sativas. What is
Hmm.
that? Well, it means different. Something different to everybody because not everybody has the same preferences and not everything affects people the same way. Like, I
Yeah.
talk about
And
caffeine,
all
for
those
example.
people are liars. Show me real sativas that are in the market that you've smoked. So it
Well,
doesn't
I
mean,
talk, like caffeine, right? So for most people, it's energizing. Like you drink it in the morning and you get that burst of energy. For people with ADHD, it calms them down, right? So you
hmm
got the same thing that does different things to different people. So, saying that a sativa is uplifting and an indica is sedating, like that's not. I think we could
that's
use them.
right. That's not how we describe our wines, right? Like when someone comes to describe a wine to you, they're going to describe things about the process, how it was created, where it was created, who created it. But they could also describe the way it's going to taste. They're going to describe
Flavor
a mouth
profile.
feel.
Hmm.
Sometimes they'll literally describe the color of it. And what I don't understand is our need to try to explain how it's going to make you feel, because that
Hmm.
is the part that's personal. For
Right.
some people, the red wine's going to make them feel social and
Hmm.
calm. And for other people, it's going to give them anxiety. For other people, it's going to make them sleepy. For other people, it's going to give them a headache. And why would the waiter try to guess that for you?
Right.
That's
Right.
crazy.
Take your clothes
And
off and dance on the table.
yeah, like the any of those things are possibilities. And so, you wouldn't market tequila as uplifting and whiskey as good for sleep. That's personal.
Right.
But for some reason we really want to be prescriptive instead of descriptive about our cannabis, as if we can guess how you're going to feel, which is such a preposterous notion. We don't do that
We don't even
with
do that with
anything else.
We don't even do that with medicine. If you go to the doctor and you say, I'm feeling depressed, the doctor will be like,
Yeah.
okay, well, here's something that works well for a lot of people. Try it. And then you can come back a few weeks later and be like, you know what? I hate this. I can't sleep. I'm getting nightmares. I've gained 20 pounds. And they'll say, okay, so that
Right.
one wasn't for you. Here's another one that seems to work also. Try this one. And then, even then, it's not usually a one and done thing. It's like, oh, this worked perfectly. It's like, okay, so then you go
Right.
back and you do some tweaks, you up the dose, down the dose, add another medication potentially. And so, like, not even a doctor is going to be like, this pill is going to make you feel this way.
Exactly. Those all come with side effect lists. So, we might casually call it a pain reliever, but a doctor's going to call it a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And so what they're going to do is explain the chemical,
The
biological action
physiological,
in the
yeah.
body, right? And to a consumer, what they have to know is you might get, diarrhea, cramps, dizzy, tired, can't sleep, irritable, like
Anal
you get a
leakage.
list of side effects, anal leakage, absolutely. And so, for cannabis, it's like what a bud tender should tell you is this is a strain that was grown by this garden. They grow indoors, they grow in cocoa. They use mostly organic nutrients, and they're listed here on the label. It smells this way to me. Hopefully, you can smell it too in the facility when you're buying it. And then,
A
you
lot of
know,
folks seem to enjoy it. We get a lot of
yeah,
positive feedback about this
or
one.
it's new and I haven't tried it, but like these can all just be true things, actual facts with,
Hmm.
source information that can be verified. And then, the idea of like this is going to make you feel energized, this is going to potentially make you feel chill and sleepy, this is going to be good for back pain. That should be rattled off at high speed like a side effect list. Like some consumers may experience these side effects when they smoke marijuana because this could happen to you, but sometimes it doesn't happen to you. And this might happen to you this time, but not next time. And if you have a little bit, it'll happen less. And if you have more, it'll happen more. And it's like we could just we
Be
could just
sure to
take
eat on
that
a
as a
full stomach.
fine print. Yeah, yeah. Take with 8 ounces of water because I know you're thirsty. It's like we could put a lot of fine print on there instead of trying to make that the headline.
Hmm.
But again, consumers want categories. And so if we're not going to give them sativa indica, we're not going to give them uplifting versus, good for sleep. We got to give them something. And I think, back to that wine example, we could just give them the basics. How is it grown? And maybe
Hmm.
that's not predictive of their experience. Who cares? It's still real information that's true.
Or who grew it. Like people have
Yeah.
their favorite wineries. They're like, I like anything that comes from this winery because they make good wine. Or, I
Oh,
like anything
absolutely. The
anything that comes
craft
from
brew
this grower.
guys,
Yep.
they like their special garage brew. Most of those are gross, so I don't know how they tell the difference, but
But yeah, yeah, like
but
the
they're committed to it.
the
And
triple IPAs, like my boyfriend is a huge beer connoisseur and he definitely has his favorite breweries
yeah,
and it really doesn't matter, what the name on the can is. If it came from that brewery, he's gonna buy it. And it doesn't matter how much it
right.
costs either. Like,
And you know what? With wine and the craft brews, what they've figured out how to do by marketing their production methods and where something comes from as the highlight, what they don't get is the same high potency, centered focus for consumers. Some IPAs are higher alcohol content, but someone doesn't choose their craft brew by its alcohol content in the same way that the waiter's not talking to you about the difference in the alcohol content of the wine. They are, in fact, different.
right.
There are variations across them, but that isn't centered as a selling point
No,
because there's something else for that consumer to
right.
care about. And I think when we don't give consumers these other categories, they're going to classify it somehow. And for me or not for me is doesn't give them a group to be a part of. They
I
want to be
think
a part of a group. And so if that group is indoor grown, outdoor grown, soil grown, grown by these guys that I think are cool, give them something.
right, give them something. They're given very little information. They've got THC, which has been really front and center
It's the
for
only number we give them. Give
sometimes we
them
give them
another
some
piece of
terpenes.
data.
Sometimes we give them like the three major terpenes, but honestly, there's only like six major terpenes anyway, so you're getting a combination of probably six or seven terpenes, which is not also not helpful, right? So,
Yeah.
having some of the things that you suggested would be really helpful. Going back to deli style, where people can smell it, because your sense of smell will tell you pretty much every time if you're gonna like something or not.
Hmm.
And your taste can change over time. Like I used to hate the smell of weed, like literally hated the smell of weed. I had a boyfriend who was a very heavy consumer. He would walk into my house with weed in a film canister in a baggie in his
Oh,
pocket.
film canisters,
And I would
old
be like, get
school.
the fuck out of my house. Go put that in your car. I can smell it. Like I could smell it through
Yeah,
it.
it's
Oh my
loud.
God. Horrible. I have since gotten over that, obviously. Actually, it was his dispensary that I went to first when I started my PhD. I walked in the door and he's like, "What are you doing here? You don't smoke." And I was like, "I'm gonna do a PhD on cannabis." And he's like, "Get the fuck out of here." He's like, "How are you gonna
Right.
come into all the dispensaries? You hate the smell of weed." And I'm like, I'm starting to get used to it. I'm starting to get over it. And now I love the smell of it. So, tastes change.
I've gone the other way. I used to just love it. Like anytime I smelled weed, it meant like maybe there's a friend. You go out to your car to smoke weed at lunch and you smell it in the lot and you're like, "Oh my God, there's someone here for me." But now I'm like walking in public and I'll be like, "Who is smoking that gross weed? Who is polluting the air with some stinky weed?" I get excited when I smell good weed out in the world, but I've gone the opposite. I'm a little bit more judgy where I'm like, "Oh, is that a spliff?" And a younger me would have been like, "Oh, I smell weed in that." Smoke is such an interesting part of the cannabis landscape too, because for so long that's just the way we consumed it. And
Hmm.
now with all the extraction, we can experience the aroma and the taste without the combustion, which I think has also contributed to, how spoiled I am and which flavors I like to smell when I'm out there with cannabis. Because since I can smell them vaporized in like that cleanest form, I'm a lot judgier. Where sometimes the smoke, I'm like, I can smell that it's burnt, and it's different. And I know that it's different. And I shouldn't have like a emotional judgment towards that, but I do because I know what it was and
You know what? I
what it could have
mean,
been.
do you ever think about like maybe going back a few years and being less judgy and not knowing what you know now?
Oh, constantly. I mean, the younger version of me, I grew up in Utah, so, all you were doing every day was trying not to smell like weed. And, just trying to cover that up the best you can. And it's so funny. Like there was a time in my life where I spent a lot of money on things to control cannabis odor. And now I spend most of my time trying to figure out how to increase cannabis odor. and, and
Trying to
so
pull
it's
out,
like, what? Yeah,
trying to
how
pull
do
out
I
those
make this
vessels.
even louder? How do I make it so that, uh, you know, all of the children Anna has in the future can smell this weed right now because it's so loud. Like I'm
So
trying to
loud that your mom's
penetrate.
gonna ground
Yeah,
you.
yeah, exactly. Like I want, to increase it. And it's so funny the difference, like I just I never would have expected to get this deep into it. But I think what's kept me in cannabis for so long is that it does continue to change and I do keep running into new problems. It's been nice to not have those problems be the political end of it, there was a time when I was a lot more of an activist and, fighting really hard for the right for a medical dispensary to even be open,
Mhm.
and so it's something that I have taken for granted in this, past 2 months, have kind of reminded me like, oh, I have gotten a little comfy in my expectation that all of this stays.
Mhm.
And so I'm feeling a little bit more grateful these days that like I really have had a lot of easy access to my favorite cannabis for a very long time. And there's still a lot of people who don't. And so for us to have any opinion on the strain name, there are still people today that buy their marijuana by the name of probably not marijuana, probably whatever code name they use in their text relationship with their friend. There's still people out there, who just get it in a bag. And we all complain about pop tops. And it's like, remember when someone licked a bag in front of you or just
Yeah.
handed it to you and you had to figure it out because it was in your hand? Like there was,
We called it hockey tickets. Do you have any hockey tickets?
yeah,
And
there you
and
go.
you never got well, very rarely would you get a strain name. Sometimes you get, oh, this is, Kind Bud from Humboldt, and you're like, oh shit, it's $100.
Yeah.
for an eighth, and it's like, well, that's a lot of money. Like usually it's 50 for,
Yeah,
but
usually strain name meant expensive.
expensive.
It described price more than, and even then, you know, no one was trying to pitch you on how you were going to feel. You were going to get high.
Mm-hmm. And it
And
was, look at the crystals and look at the red hairs, right?
oh, we used to think a lot of things about the hairs. Did the hairs mean anything? Because wow, we used to talk a lot about the
The
hairs.
red, oh, the hair's red. If the hairs are red, then that's good weed.
Yeah, yeah, really long hairs, like it was yeah. I've remembered a lot of silly classifications, as I just again get cozy and, the abundance of, cannabis that I have around. And to remember, just we used to pick seeds out. I haven't gotten a
That
seed
was
in
part
a
of the
bag of
ritual.
weed.
That was
Yeah,
part
I
of the
haven't
ritual.
seen a
Like you
seed
had
in
to
so
first you had to
long in a
de-seed the
bag.
whole bag, right? Before you could
Hmm.
do anything. And constantly finding seeds in the carpet and in the couch cushions
Yeah,
and shit like that. Or you
exactly.
missed one and it would pop and you're like, oh Jesus.
Right. Oh, to have loose seeds around plaguing me instead of like, half smoked vape cartridges. I'd like to go back almost. But, that's where again we didn't focus on, THC potency then because, even if you don't have the analytical testing angle of it, there are plenty of drugs that are sold by potency, even if you don't have a number to associate with that. And with cannabis, we just really never,
Well, it's not even so potency
it
means how strong of an effect
is
it has on you, right? So that
right,
number on the bag of cannabis is not potency, even though we call it that. That is
right.
the contents, right?
Yeah,
That
content by weight.
yeah.
Hmm.
So people calling it potency, because we know what potency is, it's like, okay, so I take
Right,
two ibuprofen because that's potent enough for me to get rid of my headache. My boyfriend takes
right.
four because two
Yeah,
is not potent enough, right? So
right.
that's what potency is, and we use it totally incorrectly in the cannabis industry, which bothers the shit
Completely.
out of me. But
Yeah.
you know, eh,
I think that right there is kind of the linguistic source of that trend, where because we called it potency, it's not that consumers want higher THC, they want higher potency. And what that really means is they want more efficacy.
mhm.
And even
Yeah,
efficacy is a slightly different meaning than potency, but potency, has a sort of marketable positive, connotation,
yeah.
whereas effective sounds very average and expected, which I think is what I want, what consumers want. They want average expectations met, you know? The idea that you would get that information reliably about how you are going to experience things in your body from a stranger in a retail transaction is
Hmm.
absurd, you know?
Hmm.
We want bud tenders to be these like psychic doctors,
Right, right.
which is just also not a thing, like neither a psychic or a doctor can predict everything for you and how you're going to feel. And a bud tender has no chance at becoming either of those.
And they're expected to know everything about every single product behind the counter. Like you don't go to a grocery store and ask, the whoever works there, like, okay, so which cheese is, they'll be like, I don't know. Like the cheese aisle is over there. You make your selection. Like you might go to the actual cheese counter and they might know a little bit more about cheese, but like the checkout person is not going to know about all the cheeses. Like
Yeah, they can
they're
tell you
there.
what aisle macaroni is on. They might not know how pasta is made. That's fine.
Yeah. Or which pasta is the best, right?
Yeah.
They can say, oh, well, I like this one. That's my favorite. But is it
Hmm.
the best? The best. That's subjective. That's going to be a personal experience.
Yeah. And you can't trust anyone calling something the best if they're about to sell it to you for money. That feels like obvious information, right?
Yeah, like every single
Their
grower,
motivations aren't pure. This is not how we decide best.
every single grower, every single breeder says, my flower is the best. Every single brewer, their beer is the best. Every
Exactly. I've had
winery,
people
their
sell me weed that was good shit, according to them. And I would say it was just shit. And that's happened many times, you know. I can't be
Mhm.
believing their adjectives.
Right.
You know, and so but you know, this is where cannabis as a medicine gets really tricky because we are just not well informed, especially in Western culture, to appreciate the the validity and difference between a natural product as medicine and a prescriptive single molecule, you know, drug as a medicine.
Formulated that is the same thing every single time. So you get a
Hmm.
very consistent result every single time. You know,
Right.
your ibuprofen, 200 milligrams per tablet, it doesn't change. So if
But
two,
it's also not 200 milligrams per tablet. It has the same variance that we do. So in the way that your, you know, cannabis might say 22 to 26% THC, there's an over under limit for that
Mhm.
ibuprofen too. You've probably never had a 200 milligram exactly tablet because they bounce around inside that container and, you know, dust comes off. Like their potency can vary in terms of your experience, but also just in the analytical statistical nature of numbers, that we're not getting that exactly perfect every time.
Two
And
tablets is close enough every single time
right.
to have a very consistent.
Yeah.
If it was like 200 milligrams per tablet, but like some of them are 100 and some of them are 400, like
Right.
that would not be
That's
okay.
a lot. But they're going to have that same, like, you know, 5 to 10% variance
Like
that is just
195,
normal. Yeah.
205. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, even in that prescriptive environment, there's a buffer that
Yeah.
everyone has to work within. And so, you know, that government obsession with the number is really harmful to the way that we understand and interact with the plant. And if there's one thing that I, you know, think is worth political action right now, it's getting rid of potency caps in all the
Mhm.
places where they're mandated because it is hard enough to control what the cannabis plant is going to do when we know what we want. And, you know, even just getting it to produce more THC isn't as straightforward as it sounds. And to try and put caps on these products and, you know, control and limit that just requires dilution that contributes to that problem and contributes to that incorrect understanding that the number is going to somehow control behavior. And, you know, that's not helpful to anyone. And I think is probably one of the more harmful things that, you know, we're doing with cannabis right now. Because if you just look at, you know, the way that hemp being, you know, sellable nationwide for a little bit split this industry in half. It reminds me a lot of when people were resistant to recreational and adult use markets and they were saying only medical, only medical. And then there was a time when we all got to say, okay, let's just all sell cannabis to everyone. And then hemp split us again. And, you know, these potency caps just start pushing people into categories that don't make sense. Because if you drink wine, you drink wine. And if you like this wine versus that wine, you still drink wine. It, you
Mhm.
know, we are not different. And if you make wine, you have the same rules as someone else who makes wine. You know, like we don't need different rules for
Unless
different winemakers.
unless you make your wine at home, and then you've got a
Right.
whole nother different set of things. Like you could make good wine, you could make bad wine, you could grow good cannabis, you could grow bad cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
But those are your choices at that point. Like you get to do it how you want
Right.
to do it. If you want to put pesticides on your plants, go ahead. That's up to you. Like if
Yeah.
if you want to grow
What you sell
organically,
for money requires, you know, some transparency in the
right,
transaction,
right.
which I think is the key. You know, I would be a lot more accepting of people selling marijuana with pesticides on it if they said that when they sold it.
And are transparent about what pesticides they used and when they used it.
Yeah,
Did they if they used it in veg,
right.
that's a lot different than applying it in flower. Um, and I think there are some pesticides that are considered harmless, but that's according to crop science, for things like vegetables that are washed or, treated in some
Sure.
way that we don't do with cannabis. And on top of that, uh, those things are ingested, not lit on fire and smoked. And that
Right.
that creates a whole different set of compounds and transforming, I don't know if that's the right word, you're the chemist. Transforming a pesticide and potentially, making harmful chemicals that you're inhaling.
Right.
Whole nother
Well,
thing.
because it's right back to potency. Does the number of ppms of a pesticide being present in the final product translate to the potency of that toxin? Not
Hmm.
necessarily.
Right.
And, poison is in the dose, but it is in the dose on a case by case basis, not as a generality. And
Hmm.
so, when we try to associate good or bad with these numbers, that is not enough context. And that's a problem, in every category of how things are sold in this industry, which is really unproductive because it stops us from going back and looking at categories that I think would inform us better.
Hmm.
It's like here's a question I have for all of the trends that you can study in cannabis. There's this concept of a good washer in cannabis.
Hmm.
And, let's assume that there's genetic integrity and it is the same strain in each of these grows.
Hmm.
A good washer has less to do with that strain for me than who grew it.
Hmm.
And even with who grew it, some harvests are better than others. And
Hmm.
even with who grew it, some harvesting practices are better than others. You can grow wonderful weed and ruin it. In your harvest and cure, you can grow wonderful weed and then freeze dry it with all the fan leaf on it, and then it's no longer a good washer, even if that strain is a classified good washer. And so, to be able to break these categories down with more details is helpful when we try to give it one name and one number.
Hmm.
Then that does become a name that doesn't mean anything because it doesn't have enough context to tell the story of that product in a way that's meaningful to somebody, and I think in the extraction, versus cultivation worlds, there's so much that we don't say to each other because we get to just throw around bad strain, you know and the idea that a strain would be good or bad for a product is insane to me when what you mean is big round trichomes that are intact are good for washing,
Hmm.
which almost doesn't need said. But when we call it good washer and we don't explain what we mean,
Hmm.
then now a grower says, oh, well, GMO is a good washer. They don't know, oh, big fat round trichomes that are intact are good for washing. That's what I want a grower to know. I want a grower to know that the reason they have to handle these buds all delicately is because I need those trichomes to fall off easily later. And if they fall off easily for you now, then I won't get any. And what they're going to know is what they've always known, which is that weight is weight, you
And
know?
then some, and sometimes that comes down to point of harvest, right? There's
Yeah.
no like rules to when you're supposed to harvest. Like when 80% of the trichomes are cloudy, it's not a scientific, but you can't say you harvest it at 5 weeks. Is that exactly 5 weeks?
I,
And when are we counting from? And like, if you harvest too early, you're going to get a different product than if you harvest too
yeah.
late. It's the difference between a green banana, a ripe banana, an overripe banana. Those are very
Mhm.
different things. It can be the exact same banana, like literally
Right.
sitting on your counter for 2 weeks, and over time, it's going to change immensely to the point where, it's rotten. Um,
Right.
and so like you were saying, you can have the exact same strain, the exact same grower, the exact same environment, and still get something that's different in a different setting because maybe they harvested
Right.
it a week earlier or a week later, and you've got smaller trichomes or you've got trichomes that are falling off, right?
Yeah. And when we don't describe the reasons behind the way we've classified it, then it's just very easy to dilute that meaning. And so, when something's called a good washer or not, if the grower doesn't understand what makes it a good washer, then that's how we also get this like real boring homogenization where now it's just like, okay, well, here's runts times everything. Here's, the same because they say, oh, well, the runts was a good washer. And it's like, no, how about all the flavors in this shape and size of trichome with this dispersal? If we could explain to growers, I don't want tight buds because they're hard to wash,
Hmm.
that is useful information for a grower because they could do something about that. And if I just explain I like this strain more than this strain, then what are they going to do? They're going to grow more of that strain. And the variety, I think, is what all of us love about that retail experience. And we lose that variety when we improperly categorize things because we don't explain why that category matters to us. And, at the consumer level, they don't need to know that the reason there's so much
Right.
GMO rosin out there is because, they're big round trichomes and there's a lot of them on the plant. Um,
They've got the most juice to squeeze.
Yeah, exactly. But what the consumer would want is just to have more, options available. And whatever we've got to do to figure it out on the, cultivation and extraction side is our business. So, the more that growers and extractors could communicate what they're actually doing with each other and like why something works or doesn't work would be so helpful. But because we sum it up in a strain name so often, we lose all of the story behind it, which I think really keeps us from having new stories. I want cultivators to, understand that those rock hard buds are so hard for everyone to extract because then we have to beat it up and grind it up and break it up. And now I'm the one leaving trichomes all over the place in order to extract it. And so, to grow for resin is such a different perspective, And if you were to think about, again, our wine example, they're growing for grapes,
Mm-hmm.
but that plant is not the grapes, right? And so
Right.
when we grow cannabis plants for weight, that'd be like growing grapes for leaves. And the leaves have a use, but the grapes are the point.
Right.
We're doing it for that juice inside the grapes. And if we had a
Yeah.
bunch of raisins on the vine, that wouldn't be a point of pride. And so when we have all these buds that are too tight with little stringy noodly trichomes, there's there's something easy to communicate between us there about what we like and what we don't and why it matters. But it's often completely lost because it's the right strain name.
Fair. I like that grape example, like because I can picture, giant juicy grapes versus little tiny grapes.
Right.
Like they both have a place depending on what you want to do with those grapes. What's your goal?
Exactly. And think about the wines that like have a little bit of stuff in the bottom of the bottle
Mm, you.
compared to the wines that like all of that is getting filtered out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quality of the extra, that's left in there, it had to have been a pretty good grape for someone to have said, "No, you probably want this."
We want that in there.
It's worth that flavor. Like my parents make their own apple juice and their own grape juice. And I just have it in my mind. I know that when I see a little bit of stuff at the bottom of a jug of apple juice, that's some good juice. I don't want to drink
Oh,
that stuff, but like, I'm like, that's some flavorful juice. That gets me, that means it's from an apple that was good that someone looked at and would have eaten compared to, one that's basically clear in a plastic jug, that feels very
floaties
far
freak
away
me
from
out.
apple.
Floaties freak me out. Whether it's in apple juice, apple,
Orange juice.
cider vinegar. I'm a Franzia girl, and that shit is filtered.
So, but perfect example there where like both products are available. There's such a trend within the cannabis industry to give that like moral good or bad to products. And it's like distillate is perfect for the people who want it. And you're not a better person than someone who likes distillate because you like rosin. They're different products.
Hmm.
There's no morality to them. One is extra filtered and one is not. And you pick what you pick. It's not. it's not an ethical decision in the way that people want to describe it. It's a manufacturing decision
Mm-hmm.
that then translates to a retail preference. And, the idea that we would demonize one product over another is so unproductive because it is all from cannabis. And if the cannabis was good, then everything else was just a decision a person made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. People love choices. People
Yeah,
just love choices. And there are people
right.
who do concentrates only. There are people who do flower only, or do either and or all of the above, right? And just depending on the time of the day, who you're hanging out with, what are your plans,
Hmm.
But you need to offer all of those choices to the consumers. Otherwise, it's like Subway, like, yeah, okay, there's a few things there, but like there's no choices really.
Like think about Taco Bell, right? Like they've got maybe four ingredients,
Hmm.
but
All
you
wrapped
have
differently.
40 different menu items, and people go to Taco Bell and order four different menu items because that choice is a preference, and that's okay.
Hmm.
We don't have to, you know, put too much like importance on which choice someone makes if it's working for them. And that's where that prescriptive approach of trying to tell people how they're going to feel is so ineffective because there are people out there who eat Taco Bell and it's totally fine for them gastrointestinally. And for the people who it's not for them,
Hmm.
and it doesn't have to be, like that doesn't inherently mean that burritos are bad or good. Like this is one version and one preference. And with cannabis, there's just such an impulse because I think we've been fighting against the stigma of cannabis is bad,
Mm.
that we still internally carry that with us. And now we say things like, well, this kind of cannabis is bad, and it's like, how about cannabis is good? How about if you grow good cannabis, it's good. And good can mean healthy, good can mean pathogen free. Like it's, the strain name doesn't matter if we don't start from the same baseline, and that baseline I think is where we really start losing touch with each other because originally it was all about secrecy almost, like remember when soil mixes were a secret, like that, and it's like relax guys, like if somebody finds out that you're using, 4% back guano, it's not going to put you out of business. But, we used to hold a lot of that information so tight and so carefully. And if we could just open up and discuss it a little bit more, I think there's
Well,
room for
yeah,
every segment in the market.
people think everything is proprietary, and it's like you're not. It's not
Even that
special.
idea isn't proprietary. So,
Like
yeah, it's
it's not
like,
special. It's somebody else has that exact same thing. Like it's not groundbreaking new science. It's just,
right.
you mix some stuff together and put a name on it.
You could be it could be the first time you did it. You don't have to be first at everything in the world, like people really, and some of that is, the marketing that because it's become so prescriptive, it just becomes such an important angle to them, because a pharmaceutical company holds on to that IP so tightly. And, it's not like anybody invented non-steroidal anti-inflammation. That's a thing that existed. And then they created a formulation that fit that equation within cannabis. I think there's a lot of things we could be proud of that we ignore in favor of that sort of IP, which is really holding us back. I think about how many people try to solve pathogen issues in their grow by getting new strains. And it's like, well,
Well, you do have to get
that's,
rid of the contaminated plants, like you got to get rid of, but, and
sure, but
there are some strains that are more tolerant to certain pathogens than other strains.
sure,
And it, often, at least from my experience, the higher THC plants are going to be more susceptible to pathogens just because they're spending so much time and energy, making compounds. It's kind of like they forgot about
right.
the big bad wolf knocking at the door coming to, infect them. And they're just,
Yeah.
it's like.
it makes me worry about the kind of genetic, homogeneity though that we see in agriculture, right? So it's
Mhm.
like on one hand we could, you know, have corn that is all different types and some of it is more susceptible. And so it's
Mhm.
not grown in such abundance. But to just only select the most tolerant so that it can still survive in a, terrible condition. I understand the value of that existing. What I don't appreciate is that being the only option and losing all of the other diversity, that's
I mean,
possible.
that's how we have catastrophic events like the banana flavor is my favorite. Like I love banana flavored candy, banana flavored slush. If something's banana flavored, I'm buying it. Like that's how much I love the banana flavor. But it doesn't taste like banana. It tastes like there's no banana that I've ever
Right.
had that tastes like. And I hate bananas, but banana flavored anything, I love it. But that banana flavor came from the banana that we had back in like the 20s and 50s
Yeah.
called the Gross Michael, and that was the only banana that was cultivated, and it got inundated with a pathogen that basically
Yeah.
wiped
I think it
out.
was a fungal infection that
Yeah.
just they couldn't stop. It was
Yep.
systemic
Wiped everything out. And
forever.
so now there are no more gross Michael. I think maybe in some botanic gardens or something there might be some, but it's not cultivated anymore. And that's why we have the Cavendish banana today, which also
Hmm.
is under threat. But when you have these monocultures and there's no genetic diversity, if
Yes.
something happens and it affects that particular thing, it's going to be gone. It almost happened with papayas. There was a genetic rescue. We hybridized it with a different papaya and it's okay now. Um, yeah. So genetic diversity is imperative,
Hmm.
and selecting for single traits destroys
Right.
diversity, and it's kind of dangerous. It's a dangerous situation to get into these,
Well, I think the end result is always an on average, less interesting product.
hmm
So, like, even if you love corn, imagine the corn that you could have loved that you'll never get to know. Just like if you love banana, you're never going to get to know that banana. And so I'm not saying that everyone needs to grow more difficult corn, but the fact that no one can is crazy. And there's so much, especially when I think about natural products as a medicine. There's mushrooms that when they're you know, collected in the wild have a totally different chemical profile than what you can produce in a cultivated environment. We just cannot replicate that. And when we lose even those novel forms of diversity, I'm not saying we should, switch entirely to collecting things from the wild. That's a risky choice too, but I want both. I want
Yeah.
both. I want both as options. And that requires us to value both and to not say this strain is better because it's more tolerant. This strain is more tolerant, and that doesn't have to be good or bad. It can just be more tolerant.
hmm
That can just be a feature of it in the way that a sativa might be tall or an indica leaf might be broad. That doesn't have to be good or bad. That could just be a true thing.
It
You
just
could just
is.
be blonde or brunette. Yeah, exactly. These could just be adjectives that do not
Right.
have, you know, any moral judgment associated with them, which
Yeah.
it would be more productive, I think, for people on both sides of working with the plant. Because when I'm extracting, I get to experience, the chemical profile of the plant in such a up close way that a grower may never, because his experience with the plant might be entirely in dealing with all of the fan leaves that is defoliating, the entire time. So, our experiences with it as a plant versus as a resin versus as a formulated product that's going to be smoked or eaten, is it's so different. And we still don't have a good enough understanding of those to be able to pass a moral judgment on something being good or bad. It feels really lazy of us to,
hmm
lump things together that way. I think, good cannabis is good and all cannabis can be good in that regard.
hmm
Especially as an extractor, we can remediate heavy metal out of the soil with the plant and we can remediate heavy metal out of the plant through extraction, and it can still be a perfectly good edible. And, that doesn't have to be good or bad, because it is bad to consume heavy metals, but it's good to get them out of the soil, and it's good to get
Mm.
them out of the plant, and
Right?
it's good to not have them in the food.
Yeah.
So, how does three goods make a bad?
Wow. I'm kind of interested to know, like, kind of what your day looks like.
So I live in Colorado, and
Oh, you do? I just
I
sold my house in
do.
Colorado. I lived in
Yeah.
Colorado for a long time.
So Colorado, I think, is an interesting place to, watch the cannabis industry from,
Hmm.
because it's very old, very mature market. As an industry, it's a tourism state, which is a unique
Hmm.
position to be in, because we get then a snapshot of, consumers from everywhere, rather than
Hmm.
just, something like Oklahoma, which is a lot of Oklahomans,
And
so
nobody wants to
I've
go
been
to
able,
Oklahoma.
but the people who are there aren't leaving. So,
Right, right. But yeah, like you don't vacation in Oklahoma generally.
right. Yeah. So like, I know what's going to sell well in Texas without having to sell anything in Texas, because I've been selling weed to people from Texas, the whole time.
Yeah.
So, I've watched this industry from that, very kind of central middle of the country and middle of the
Mhm.
cannabis world, position for a long time. And now more than ever, my job is traveling outside of the state, because as a consultant, when I'm working with people, all the new businesses are happening outside of the state. A lot of the big, buyouts and things are happening outside of the state. Colorado has really stabilized as an industry significantly. And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, that stabilization has come with, real price compression that is so hard to survive. Like, we have more people closing and not renewing licenses every year than applying for new ones. And so, back to my dreams of diversity, when we have the same people selling the same stuff for too long, it gets a little bit stagnant in, the way things are produced and made. And so the trends have really sort of flattened here.
Mm-hmm.
And the prices are lower than they've ever been, and they don't go up seasonally like they used to. We used to have at least parts of the year where it would fluctuate, but it seems that price per pound has gone down and stayed down. And so, the work that I do in state is all about, how do we optimize? How do we squeeze what we can out of our margins? And when I go out of state, it's more about, how do we start something new? How do we develop something new?
Mm.
So, it's a different experience depending on where I'm working. In the states that are brand new, that's always like really energizing for me, because they're just so excited again. They're on their first, second, third harvest. They're still loving it. Whereas in Colorado, I literally, growers cry
Mm.
when I talk, like there's emotional distress in Colorado,
Mm.
same with California. And I saw it there first, where when I would ask someone how their grow's doing, I didn't know what a heavy question, I was posing. And so, I see that strain in the industry here quite a bit. And so the work here is so much about, strategy to keep a business afloat without enough money and without enough resources, in a market where consumers demand very low prices. And it's hard to do the thing we all loved that got us into
How
this industry in that
how
space.
how how did the prices get so low? Like we were talking about back in the 90s, that a bag of Kind Bud was $100, and
Mm-hmm.
a bag of Swag was $50, and that was the price. And like people are complaining about the prices, and oh, it's too expensive. I'm like, it's 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 not though. Like
Right.
it's not more expensive than it ever was, and it's way cheaper than it was, and it's arguably better depending on what you're looking for, right? So I just don't understand
it's
how.
it's the abundance, right? We When this industry started out, we ran out of weed.
Hmm.
a strain would run out on the shelf.
Hmm.
And so the longer the industry was around, people tried to close that gap. And from an agricultural perspective, yes, you can buy strawberries every day of the year.
Hmm.
Probably shouldn't. Some days of the year, those strawberries are no good,
They're not
some
good.
days,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And so sometimes I think it's okay to be out of stock of an agricultural product because if it's not fresh, it's not the same. And so as soon as we had shelf stability, instead of selling it deli style, where, when it's fresh, because that's also the urgency, right? Like if I knew something could sell out, I'd go get it. I'd be like, I have to go today because it
Mhm.
won't be there tomorrow. And if
Right.
I know that it's gonna be there tomorrow and next week and the week after that, and in fact, the product will be the same batch next month because there's such a big batch that it spans all of this time, that's not that's not creating the urgency for sell through, which means that the demand is lower, which means that my motivation has to be on price. Now I'm only going to buy more if it's cheaper. I'm not going to buy more because I won't get the chance again. And so, the way we value that product has changed completely when it's so abundantly
That's
available.
so it's kind of a matter of quality. Like people will pay for quality,
Absolutely.
if it's worth it to them, and depending on what their idea of quality is. But THC, people have started equating price with quality because the higher the THC, the higher the
Mhm.
price. It's platinum, it's premium.
Right.
They assume that that is going to be a quality product, which, as we all know, in cannabis, that is not true. THC
I,
does
I
not
think
equal
I think
quality.
consumers don't even use it as this is a quality product. I think one thing every grower should maybe take in, and really think about is that if consumers only purchase your highest THC strains, all of your weed probably isn't that great.
Right. And it's this vicious cycle. They don't have Consumers don't have any other metric to base their decisions on.
Right.
If it's a higher price, it's higher
Hmm.
THC, should equal higher quality. Now we've got people that are
Right.
purchasing what's supposed to be the highest quality. They don't like it because it's giving them anxiety attacks or making them feel like a psycho,
Right.
right? Because it's got a lot of THC in it. And novices are, they're like, well, I'll try it because, now it's
Yeah.
legal. And then they find out they don't like it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
because it's got so much THC, like there is no choice. Like you can't
For
purchase
sure.
6, 10, 12% THC because nobody will grow it, because they can't sell it, because nobody will,
Right.
and it's like this vicious cycle of,
Well, and the easiest way to get higher THC is to over dry your weed. Because remember, potency isn't, efficacy. Potency is content by weight.
yeah.
And so the more water I evaporate, the faster I evaporate it, the more THC I'm going to have.
I
And
mean,
so
if you
as a
want,
consumer, I don't want dry weed.
right,
That's a bad smoke.
right. And I tell people, like, if it's high THC you want, then you don't want flower. Like, that's
Mhm.
not the product you're looking for. If you want, you can buy
Right.
flower and then add a concentrate to it to make sure that it gets that high THC that you're looking for. To have
Right.
high THC flower in so many ways is a decrease in quality, right? And I don't,
Well, and dry flower is going to literally smoke hotter. It's going to
yeah,
burn
yeah.
faster. So there's a chemical change that's occurring in that experience as well compared to something that's got, a tolerable moisture content. And so, you have the actual smoking experience changing when we end up with a bunch of dried out high
Well,
potency weed.
and really, how accurate is that number on the label? You know, I mean, there's so many ways that that number can be not
Right.
accurate, right? That Yeah, maybe you dried the shit out of it and then had it
Yeah.
tested, but your cannabis that you're selling to the public has like 18 or 20%, but
Right.
it tested at 35%.
Well, I think, in terms of potency, like you're saying, that experience that the consumer has, for dried out weed in a joint at, let's call it 30%, I might lose most of that THC in the speed of the smoke. I might not be getting it into my body compared to something that's going to burn slower because it's got 12% moisture content by weight and a lower THC, so that those trichomes have time to, break down. The
Hmm.
THCA inside has time to convert to D9, and then I get to smoke and inhale it. And if I don't have time for any of that because it happens so instantly, because it's a hot, fast burn, that's
Hmm.
like trying to warm your house by putting newspaper in the fireplace. Like,
Hmm.
heat comes off, but it's not the same heat as a
Right.
pine log,
Right.
and it's not reasonable to compare the two. And so, the consumer experience, we could put moisture content on the label and we could verify that in the store at the point of sale. And that would tell us a lot more about how it's going to smoke
Hmm.
than even the potency sometimes. And a higher resin content by weight, used to be associated kind of like, this is the craziest part, right? Is we've got weed that's 30% and it's not sticky.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
happened to sticky weed?
It's gotta be sticky. It's gotta have red hairs.
If
It's
I
gotta.
don't need scissors to break it up, I don't know, what it is. Like, I want stuff that's sticky, and it's been a long time since sticky was the standard. Kids today probably don't even know what sticky icky is because they
It's dry and
have
crusty, crusty,
they have
dusty.
vape cartridge. It's a different product to them entirely.
We've
They've
gone from
never.
sticky icky to crusty dusty.
Yeah. Oh, that's a much worse rap song. Oh no. The crusty dusty.
The crusty dusty.
Oh, that would make a good shirt though. No, I am going to start calling people's marijuana crusty now when they deserve it. I think that's a very good adjective for some of it because, and that has a lot to do, with like the volume and the way that it's being cared about. Because as soon as people stop paying more for that cannabis, the shortcuts that are taken in the manufacturing side get more and more severe. And
Yep, yep,
that's a cycle that's very hard to get out of.
yeah. There's a lot of cycles that are very hard to get out of, and I don't know. I mean, I guess for me, education is one of the
Yeah.
things that we need so much more of. I teach cannabis science. You're constantly educating people. Um, I feel like
Well, I think
consumer
even
education.
communication more so, because the education is out there, but it's very one way. It's very, one person putting information out and hoping
Hmm.
others receive it rather than many people in dialogue,
Hmm.
And so, like, a lot of science education is written in a way that the natural layperson is going to reject it because it's judgy, and I think that's true in cannabis as well, where if it doesn't feel very accessible, then they can't talk about it with the people around them. I think about how many people don't talk about terpenes because they're afraid to pronounce it wrong. And I want to tell everyone today and tomorrow and forever, pronounce it however you want.
Give it
I
your
don't
best
care.
shot. Give it your best
Yeah,
shot. I'll know what you're
exactly.
talking about.
Yeah, and when in doubt, say a joke name, make it silly. There's just no reason to worry and make that, like the gatekeeping of who's allowed to participate in education, I think is a really tough one in cannabis. A lot of people talk about how much education bud tenders need. Nobody talks about how much education bud tenders can provide backwards to the industry.
Hmm.
How many growers ask bud tenders what they think of the strain and really listen, compared to how many will tell a bud tender what a strain's going to do for them,
Here's the
which
product.
is
Right. Here's
which
the
is
product.
just,
Sell it.
yeah, and that's very linear. And I think let's here's a cycle to start, is like, let's all talk in a circle backwards so that that information is useful. That
And that's
feedback loop is really valuable.
and that's, within the industry, but we also have the consumers. They're standing on the other
Yeah.
side of the counter. They're through no fault of their own, they're assuming that that person that they're talking to knows what they're talking about. and has had education and knows about the product and everything, when a lot of times that's not true. They're either, making stuff up because they really don't know,
Yeah.
or they're just regurgitating what the distributor told them when they launched the product, or whatever the case may be. But I feel like consumers could benefit from a lot more education if they want it.
Yeah.
Um, and learn, like, what questions do you ask? What are the red flags to look for?
Sure.
How do you um assess a product? You know,
Right.
because based on THC and based on price is not really good. And we don't have usually places where you can smell a product. Uh,
Yeah.
so and consumers are like scared to ask questions. Like
Right.
they're going to be called stupid.
Exactly. They're afraid to interact with that education. They feel like they're supposed to receive it, understand it, know it, and use it. And that's not really how education works. Education has to be interactive. I think about how many consumers tell their bud tenders about their experience as if that information goes anywhere.
Right.
Like every grower should work a day behind the counter and
Hmm.
hear what people have to say.
I would love to
And
work in a dispensary, but nobody will hire me.
yeah, well, no, they're not going to pay you for that, but maybe you could stand there and
I would,
shadow,
no,
because
I
there's
mean,
a lot of value in what
I would
consumers say if
I
you
would
listen.
take a normal pay, like a normal hourly wage,
Yeah,
like, 15 to $25 an hour. I'm not like, I would be there for the
yeah,
education, for the experience, um,
right.
to know not only how it feels to stand and be a bud tender and be in their shoes and listen to how management directs you, and how, when you get a new product in, how they market that and how you're supposed to pass that on, and then also how the consumer
Yeah,
experience is and the kinds of questions that they ask, and the levels of experience that they have, because it's everything from I've
hmm,
never done this before, can you help me, to,
right.
I know everything and I don't need your help, kind of thing. And
Totally.
and not just the products, but like, so many edibles are easy. You buy it, you eat it. But with a lot of these other, flour included, you need some sort of accoutrements to come along with that. Like, you need a grinder, you need a lighter, you need to be able to light a lighter. So if you're an
Hmm.
elderly person with arthritis, that's not going to be a great product for you, because that's a lot to handle. Got glassware. Like, I have never, well, other than hot knives, I've never done concentrates, because I don't know how to fucking work a dab rig, and I'm not going to ask because I'm going to feel like a dumbass, right?
Right.
I've seen people do it, but the all of the things that you have to do it, like, I'm not going to do it. I won't even
Hmm.
do hookah because I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I'm not going to ask. I just won't.
Too many parts. It's an
There's
apparatus.
And it's
Yeah,
not
it's
intuitive.
right. Well, think about, if this were a restaurant setting, when I order a steak, if I didn't like it and I tell the waiter, that information goes all the way back to the chef. And
Hmm.
so, that's instant feedback. That means
They
that
might even take the
my
steak back and offer you
literally
something
my
different.
next steak will be the a better one than the one I just had. So that improves my experience immediately and possibly other people's experience right after that, because that chef got that information. Could you imagine a waiter takes the steak back, orders another one for you, and you get the same one back because you didn't
Hmm.
tell the chef what was wrong with it?
Hmm.
That's crazy. But from a grower's perspective, if the weed sold, it is sold. And so if a consumer comes back and says, I didn't like that, I don't want that, I want to buy something else, they will never know that that was the experience. And so when they produce more of that same weed that sold and it doesn't sell, now the price has to go down because they didn't learn anything from the
Mm.
first harvest to the next. That feedback does not loop. That feedback is a stopgap, at
Hmm.
that dispensary associate, because no one's listening to them backwards. It's not a conversation. It's, a communication down the line, and that instructional approach from people, I think, kind of misses the point in the collaborative nature that is using natural products as a medicine or, as a recreational activity. if we're going to have a complex product, there are going to be complex experiences, and we can't, to grow the next harvest without having that direct consumer feedback from the first feels crazy. And that's every day for a lot of these grows. And, especially when they run into issues in the grow, to then start self-selecting out, consumers are going to buy what's available the way we always did. We bought what was available. Is the marijuana for sale? I'll have some marijuana today. And now that there's the potential for choice, we're almost taking it away from ourselves again, because that feedback loop is, back to, did it sell? Then it's sold. And if I bought it and I didn't like it, then I just go get something else the next time. But it doesn't mean I'm going to like that either, because no one's learning from each other's experiences when we
Yeah.
don't, educate each other. Like consumers need education on plants, but growers need education on consumers. Extractors need education on the grow. There's everyone needs to learn the other sides of the industry that they interact with. And you could go very Kaizen about it and just learn one new thing a day, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You know,
Right.
there's little pieces that we could take in, but a lot of it comes from being very siloed. The guy who grew the weed used to be the one who sold you the weed, and then there was a dealer in between. And so, in that game of telephone, the further away you get from the source,
Mm-hmm.
the crazier the message gets. And we are now very far away from our source in
Mm-hmm.
this transaction. And so, of course, the message is 49% THC that's going to, help you fly to Mars. Like, of course, that's, like, of course, that's what's going to happen, because we've gotten very far away from, that conversation in between two people about what their experiences are,
It is
which
crazy.
is a shame.
It's absolutely crazy because at the heart of it, the cannabis industry is a service industry. Our
Yes.
end goal is consumption, right? Is to the consumer. Like that's who we're growing for, that's who we're manufacturing for. And I worked in pizza for a really long time, and my
Hmm.
very, very smart area supervisor once told me, if a customer has a bad experience, um, you get feedback. They're going to call you. They're going to say, my pizza sucked. And if you don't take care of that customer,
Hmm.
if you don't send them another pizza, if you don't apologize, if you just say, well, that sucks, whatever, um, that consumer has somebody who has a bad experience is going to tell on average 20 people about their bad experience.
Yeah.
Somebody who has a good experience might tell one person. And so it's way more important to take care of your customers that have bad
Hmm.
experiences than those happy customers, because they're going to keep coming back. If they're having good experiences, they are going
Right.
to, they're going to tell their friends like, oh, I go to this dispensary because the people there are really nice, the product's really good, they know what they're talking about. But it's the consumers or the customers that have bad
Hmm.
experiences that can really hurt your business, right? And it's
Right.
really the customer who's signing your paycheck. Because if they're not purchasing, you're not making money, you can't pay your people. And so every single employee from top to bottom needs to realize
Right.
how important our customers are, our consumers. That's who we're selling
Hmm.
to. And I
Well,
don't think
the
that
one
we.
person who speaks up is one too, because for every
Mhm.
one person who says my pizza was a little doughy or my pizza was cold, 10 others had that same experience
And didn't say anything and
and
aren't
didn't
coming
say
back.
anything.
And they're telling
So
20
one
people.
customer is not one. One customer represents everyone who feels the way they do.
Hmm.
Every customer is their own demographic. And so, if you don't treat their feedback as seriously as you would treat your own feedback,
Hmm.
then you are very likely, as I said before, to be growing some pretty average wheat. You are very likely to be settling when you could be striving. And, if you ignore that feedback, our default is to assume that must mean it's good enough. But that rarely is the case. It
Hmm.
rarely it rarely is the case that consumers are happy with the product but then never buy it again. When you find your strain that you love, you get excited about it when you're in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And if that never gets communicated back to a grower, they'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, it's really hard even when I think about the different roles within the cultivation facility. Master growers, as much as everyone hates that name, back when I first started hearing that job title, those people took clones, popped seeds in paper towels. They did every job. Those people mixed their nutrients. Those people were in the trim room. Those people were doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the master to me meant multi-purpose. They had all of those skills. Whereas today, someone who might hold that master grow position is delegating 100% of propagation, 100% of fertigation, 100% of, harvesting. And, it's really important for those roles when they get isolated like that for them to get that still very holistic experience of the plant, because someone whose job is to defoliate only and doesn't ever understand the value of defoliation is a wasted opportunity, in the same way that someone who is in charge of nutrients should understand that someone comes behind them to pick off more fan leaves. So if we are pumping these plants up to produce more leaves when we want resin, and then we're paying someone else to harvest leaves when what we want is resin, we have failed twice now to get
Right.
resin. And if that same, goal of get resin isn't communicated at the time of harvest, now we have plants on the floor. We have plants being hung together. We have plants bumping over, bumpy hallways as they get traveled from one room to another. And the the fact that not everyone is under the impression that their job is to protect resin is a real
Right.
problem.
Right.
And the consumer is the one who can remind us of that, in the same way that a consumer will remind you how they like their steak. There's a lot of reasons why the steak might have come out a little more well done or a little more rare. The consumer wants what they want, and
Mm-hmm.
all of your mitigating factors are your job to solve, to give the
Mm-hmm.
consumer what they want.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we think our job is the job, and our
It's a
job
it
is
you
usually a piece.
you make a good case for cross training, right? Where
Absolutely.
everybody learns every position, and whether that be in a restaurant, like if you've never been on the front line, you've only been in the front of the house, like you don't understand what
Oh,
goes on the line, then you
cooks
can't.
hate a server who doesn't understand the back of the house. Servers hate cooks that don't understand their job.
Right.
Absolutely.
And in a cultivation facility, if you don't know every single part of the grow, haven't been trained, haven't, gone
Yes.
through the training, then you're in a little bubble with such little information and understanding of
Hmm.
what are we doing here? You know,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think, the only people who are excited to trim cannabis are people who haven't done it before. So let's rotate, like if we get,
Yeah.
can you imagine, if a bud tender got to go help defoliate, once a month, what their experience would be when they're talking to their customers at the counter, because
Hmm.
they can say they've been to the grow. They can say,
Hmm.
these plants were taller than me. I needed a ladder to work with them. Now we can actually start
Hmm.
talking about the origin and the source and the way that it was grown, because they will have exposure to it. They'll have knowledge of it. And they don't have to be fully trained to do a perfect job in a room. They can just go assist somebody and get that internship level exposure. And like you're saying, you're like, I would love to, but no one will give you the opportunity. Meanwhile, these places that won't give you the opportunity have never taken down their LinkedIn job posting hiring for that position, because their turnover is so high. And it's like,
Right.
man, this is a problem that could really solve itself. Uh, you know, right inside of our own ecosystem, without much more effort than we're already putting in,
Yeah.
because everyone wants to participate. I mean, your
It's so
customers want
exciting
to
to
trim
learn
more
something.
than anybody.
It's so exciting to learn something new too. Like, do you want to be, do you only want to be the person who drops the fries? Like, no,
Yeah.
like that's very, like the first
Right.
couple of days, it's fun and it's exciting, but like that loses its, flavor, or it loses its
Yeah,
excitement very fast. You want to, you want to move on the line. You want to be the burger flipper. You want to
right.
help the prep cooks in the morning because
Yeah,
it's something new, something different. You start to learn
right,
how all the moving pieces and parts of this restaurant. I personally would never want to be a server because I don't like people, but I do understand the process of serving people, and I know that it's not for me, right?
right.
So,
And it would make you value what they do in a different way, right? Like a lot of growers shouldn't be bud tenders because they're also bad at dealing with people, and so that tracks.
yeah,
And and that should come with respect for that position.
right.
And instead it often doesn't, like
Yeah.
think about if the person who, is working the fries never has to clear the plates in the restaurant to see that nobody finishes their fries
Hmm.
because they don't like them,
Right.
or gets to see that people eat 100% of their fries, even the like they like shake it out because they're so good and they love them. If you
And
never
leave
get
half
to
the burger.
see, yeah, yeah, exactly. If you never get to see how the job you do impacts that final result, it's much harder
Hmm.
to take pride in it. And like I was saying about Colorado, California, there's a lot of growers who have gotten so far away from growing cannabis for people,
Hmm.
and it's not good. It's not good for them. It's not good for the product. It's not good for the people. The job gets very tiresome and very exhausting, and all of that is very easy to solve by being able to trade places
To
a
make
little bit.
connections. Yeah, you
Maybe we
could.
need to get, HDTV or TLC or whoever does that on the, like let's start trading places with some of these staff members so that they can,
Undercover boss.
yeah, exactly. Because it's not a secret, but nobody seems to know the secrets of each other's angles,
Hmm.
and that's I think not productive for any of us when we're trying to, think about education. Like we could talk all day to bud tenders about how high THC isn't the only thing that matters, but if we don't listen to those bud tenders and say, yeah, but this is always shake because it always falls apart in the bag, so it's always sold on a discount because your dry weed crumbles into dust, you crusty dusty grower. If we never get the other half of that, we could just say, why are you promoting high THC? And they're like, why are you promoting dry shake? And so some of this works both ways. That is it's not as complicated as we might trick ourselves into believing. We can
Mm-hmm.
actually solve it with just a little bit more, you know, conversation
Hmm.
about the experience and the process. And that comes with an openness where people aren't afraid, like you said, to say, I don't really understand how to take a dab. Because you might say that, and someone might try to explain the science of distillation to you. And someone else could be like, if you push this button twice, then when the lights flash pink, it's ready to go. And like
Even that's too
both
much for
things
me.
are true, but it's like there's so many levels to it that is just not being, you could call all of those things education, but if you didn't learn, the burden of communication is on the person speaking to make sure the person listening understands.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
on the person listening to understand what you said. That's your job. Make it
Yeah.
understandable.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't check in to find out
Right.
if people received us.
Yep. Yep. I couldn't agree more. You have so many good insights, and so like I like the way your brain thinks. I like the way you communicate, and like it's just been
Well, thank you.
so refreshing to sit and talk and listen with you. Um, I'm coming away from this conversation with, a whole new set of eyes, we kind of get caught in our own bubbles sometimes, but and that's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is so that I can sit down and have conversations. I mean, I have conversations every day with people in the industry in all different arms, but like I want to get
Right.
some like solid time in and record it because I guarantee you tomorrow I will forget what you said. But
That's all right. That's why we save
it's
it.
been
Yeah.
amazing. Like I've learned so much and I just it always, it's one of my core values. Like we are growing this plant for the people,
Yeah.
right? That's
And we
that's
say that all the time, but how often do we talk to those consumers? We should
right.
get some regular customers on the podcast one of these days and just
Oh,
let
I
them say
should.
some stuff.
Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So if you're in the audience, DM me or email me or
Yeah.
something. Maybe we can
Just
get a
post up in the
panel.
dispensary one day and just say, "Hey, do you want to tell
You
me
want
ask me a question, tell me something you think about cannabis because yeah, for the plant to be for the people, we got to get some more people
we gotta get
talking."
some more people. Yeah. And be able to share their experience in a safe space, not,
Right.
have somebody like screw their nose up and be like, you're stupid. You don't even know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Right.
Right. Yeah. If you think you love sativas, that's fine. If you think you love indicas, that's fine. If you think that sativa and indica don't matter, that's also
That's
fine. We can
fine.
still smoke weed together
If you want to
and
say
smoke our own
cultivar,
separate weed.
if you want to
Yeah.
call it a cultivar, okay. If you want to call it a strain, sure. I know exactly what you're talking
Right.
about. It's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely. As long as we all love the cannabis slash marijuana slash hemp,
Right.
the herb, the plant,
The
whatever
sticky
you
icky, the
want to
crusty
call
dusty.
the crusty. That's what I'm taking away from this conversation. Is sticky icky to crusty dusty, a cannabis story.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation we could all have a little more often. I would love that.
All right. Well, I have to run, and I'm sure you do too. So
It was a
it was
pleasure.
so nice talking to you. And
Yeah,
I hope to meet you in person someday, perhaps at a conference or something.
yeah.
All right. Well, have a good day. Again, thanks a lot,
You too.
and I'll talk to you
Thanks
soon.
for having me.
Yeah.
Can't wait.